Hey everyone, welcome back to the fifth segment of the book review for Atomic Habits by James Clear, as you see here. I'm pleased to get into the fourth law, Make It Satisfying, this evening. We've covered the first three laws in the introduction, and next week we will have the last section, which covers some of the advanced topics. And I appreciate anyone that's come along with the journey so far. It's been an interesting learning experience to do this. I've enjoyed it immensely and look forward to doing this more in the future and getting better and better at it. I apologize up front if you're watching this. If you're watching this weeks from now, you'll never know this. But for those of you that know, I intend to post these on Tuesdays. This likely will not be posted on Tuesday this week, just some things that have come up. But we'll be up within 24 hours. Won't be too delayed on that. So with that said, let's jump right into let's make it satisfying, right? So chapter 15 is entitled The Cardinal Rule of Behavior change. Cardinal Rule of Behavior Change. And it starts out with a story about how there was a young man who quit his job and went to Karachi and had observed everything going on there. And this was in the 90s, and how dirty and things of the nature, and folks were doing what they could. It was an up and coming city in terms of population and popularity and growth and things of that nature. And one of the problems they had was sanitary, really. They describe it as being dusty and garbage when it's dry, and a big piece and kind of sewagey in the general population areas when it's raining and whatnot. So he said, well, how can we absolutely take care of this in a way that people will want to make sure they have better hygiene habits to help them with some sicknesses and some skin things that were going on? And so he was able to bring in a soap and water supply. And it seems so little, like it's not like they didn't have soap and water, because they did, we found out in the story. But he brought in a nice, clean smelling, high-end soap, and they got used to doing that. And now, flash forward, however long later, they don't have that soap necessarily, but the habit of making it appealing to wash their hands rather than just being something that goes through the motions, pardon me, coupled with showing them how to do it properly, really made all the difference in the world. And to this day, it's actually improved. So kind of amazing. And it brings us to the first quote that kind of stuck out to me in this particular section. And it is, we are more likely to repeat a behavior when the experience is satisfying. And I think we can all think of examples. Generally, we think of things that are probably either neutral or negative, because we find out later why that is, but we can go into that. But that leads us into what the title of the chapter is, the Cardinal Rule of Behavior Change, which what is rewarded is repeated and what is punished is avoided. So you kind of have that double-edged sword, the pleasure and pain, if you will, which I think is an apt way to put that, especially as the way the whole reading section closes out. So what we learn here is that there's also a situation where, the feedback you get is absolutely going to be measured in kind of two different ways in your brain. So you either realize there's immediate feedback and that's something you desire and enjoy, or you realize there's something that's going to be delayed and that may cause dread potentially. And generally, as we think about these things, that's also how you look at something that is an easy thing that we do or fall into, like, oh, let's just go out to dinner tonight, rather than making dinner, which would probably be a healthier option in a lot of cases, though maybe not. Maybe you're disciplined when you go out, or maybe it's even the money factor with that. Who knows? But the immediate return is we can go out to dinner. We don't have to be served. Someone's going to bring us our food. We can get exactly what we like. If we're making dinner, it seems a little delayed and you may be a little limited if you didn't plan very well. And so what we learn here is that the immediate satisfaction is absolutely the key, and the reason why we tend to gravitate to and get those habits that we do end up forming very quickly. And in some of those other negative cases we talk about, like smoking. So, that's a nicotine fix. It's a quick hit high, not a high. It's a whole different type of smoking. But you know what I mean. But then the other thing here is we talked about immediate delay just a moment ago. And when you think in this perspective, so what is the long-term delayed thing that could happen with smoking? Well, there's actually a negative long-term that really, truly should offset that immediate kind of nicotine rush that you might get from the cigarette, because you could get lung cancer or have lung diseases, things of that nature. And we don't think about that. And normally, if you think about the things that we want, those aren't necessarily things like if I want to lose weight. I don't necessarily, the habits I do today aren't going to show me losing 50 pounds. I've got to do that over time, and it's got to happen kind of organically, and I've got to be able to make sure those things happen. So how do we make sure that we get to a place where habits, we feel like they are attractive? That's kind of where we're going. And so with regards to a habit, another quote that struck me in here is, as a general rule, the more immediate pleasure you get from an action, the more strongly you should question whether it aligns with your long-term goals. So that's kind of the whole overriding factor that I really stuck with me here is what am I feeling right now, and what did I do for that? That was interesting to me. And again, this whole idea of immediacy talks about updating that cardinal rule of behavior change, which has been something that's out there. James Clear says we should add the word immediately in there. Again, you're sensing a theme. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. So flipping that switch to say, let's focus mostly on that immediate feeling right after whatever we did. So what do you do if you have those positive things, but they are building to something in the future? Well, he says, let's look at reinforcement, because we really aren't going to necessarily say after that first gym visit that you feel like you're on your way to lose 50 pounds or whatever that health goal is. But you absolutely have to kind of look at that and say, yeah, well, what was how did you reward yourself there? So works best when this works best when you need to avoid certain types of things. So like in this case, the example he gave, I believe, was one of the examples was, if you tell yourself, I'm going to eat ice cream if I work out today. Well, maybe that's not the best particular reward, because it's really an offset. Essentially, you worked out, but you ate ice cream. And so thinking about from that perspective, maybe a better way to look at it is, if I work out 3 times a week for the next 3 weeks, I'll get a massage. And that's a better reward because it's getting towards your ultimate goal and moving forward in what you're looking to do there. And so that was a good non-monetary example, because there were some monetary examples in the books too. Like if you want to buy an impulse item, or there's an item that you think you want to buy, then, maybe offset that by taking things that you want to take out of your repertoire, your habits, and put the money in the bank account. So rather than going to Starbucks, take that $5, throw it in the bank account, or even an envelope labeled leather jacket was the one in the book. And I thought that was a pretty cool idea to think about it in that respect. But really making those short-term goals align with those short-term habits align with those goals. Hopefully they become long-term habits if they're that good and solid. Takes us into chapter 16, how to stick with good habits every day. And so this got brought about the idea of visual measurement. And if you remember the idea of the young sales stockbroker that had the 120 paper clips in one cup, and he moved them to the other cup as he made cold calls. And now anyone that's done any sort of cold calling knows it absolutely stinks. It's absolutely terrible. So if you make it a game and you can see your visual progress, it's why, like he points out in the book, we get, when you download software and stuff, you get a progress bar. They don't want you to just lose, focus or whatever and leave the computer or say, screw it, whatever. We need to feel that way. And so, there's all other ways to do this. You can do visual cues like that. There's the simple calendar method as well, where you just simply put an X on a calendar when you've done whatever habit or task that is. And I didn't know this. I thought this was an interesting side in there, that Seinfeld would write a joke every day. And he didn't care if it's good or bad, but that was his X in the calendar every day to make sure he was continuing to do that habit of writing a joke, because you never know what you put in your pocket one day and you bring it back out. Might be gold, or it could be something that builds into something else. Or if nothing else, you can look back and say, hey, I did it that day. Because a little later on, we get into the idea of continuing to think about compounding. We'll probably come back to that, but you don't compound if you stop doing something. It can't compound any further. So that was the whole thought process too. Seinfeld's was also about not breaking that chain. Sorry guys, if I have a little in my throat, I'll try to edit out as best I can, but you may still catch a few in there. So it's just been so far in this particular chapter, I was pulling a lot of ideas out. So he talks about a few more ways or thought processes on tracking, automation, which has been a theme throughout this book. He used the idea of like a Fitbit if you're tracking steps, because obviously that's something you really probably couldn't truly track every day. You'd be spending your focus and time on that, but taking that. But then the key there was to make yourself a reminder to go and look at your results. Now, I think most people with today's society, because they Bluetooth into your phone, are going to look at your results every day, or it'll hit your watch or whatever. But the point is, if you don't set that up, at least go look at it at regular intervals, because you continue to need that affirmation and reaffirmation. He obviously said pen and paper, but limit the manual tracking to only the most important things. If you try to do this for 10 things in a day, most people are not going to be successful at that. He used an example of Ben Franklin earlier in the chapter. He said he did his virtues. I think there were 13, if I recall, which was kind of counter to what he's saying here. So it's just, point was, it took a very special person, and it's not likely that we're all going to track 13 things, or if there even are 13 things that are that and key and important that we know we need to track. And then the last real particular thing he said is make sure you record anything immediately that you need to record. That's your gratification. That's your satisfaction. That's putting it down on paper as I accomplished. I did. I made sure I followed through. We get also some cool tiebacks to earlier in the book where we talk about you can do habit stacking plus habit tracking. So we like rhyming, of course. Who doesn't like rhyming? Duh. So after I blank, which is current habit in this case, I will track my habit, which is all fine and well. And while you're doing well and you're linking them together every day, it just is very interesting. And, you're happy. And then all of a sudden life happens and you miss a day. So what do you do then? I mean, honestly, right? You missed a day. Now you're off rhythm. This is where one of the few times he really just gets into it and says you have to have a mindset for it. And his mindset that he likes to set out is never miss twice. So he actually kind of backs over that a lot in the next section. But he really says, if you have to miss, don't miss twice. In other words, don't let one become two and start a string of missing. Get back into it. And then he goes back into the point about compounding like we talked about earlier. So basically the whole thing is don't let it compound to be bad on the negative side and miss twice, 3 times, 4 times because you had to purely miss once. But in the same breath, if it's something that you can absolutely potentially do part of or do something so that you don't completely miss, then you're still continuing to compound. So what that you didn't do 3.5 miles, you only got out and did 1.5 because you were time crunched that day. Or instead of doing that, you did 50 push-ups and 50 sit-ups. At least you can say you were active. So the quote I pulled out there is, don't let losses eat into your compounding. Remember, that compounding factor is the key to everything because it just grows and explodes on itself. And when you're in that particular mindset, in that particular mode, the last thing you want to do is look back and say, I lost momentum, I lost steam. Keep it going. Give yourself partial credit, not no credit. It's always better to do something. That is just unreal. And we always forget that. We always think, well, I can't do it, so I'm not going to do anything. Don't do that. How many times do we catch ourselves that way? I can honestly tell you, I catch myself in that more than I would like. And so my mindset from now on is going to be do what I have time to allow, do what my particular circumstances will allow. Don't let that stop you. Absolutely. And so that brings up another point he gets into about when to track and when not to track. And we get to the point where we talk about what is important to track and what do we think is important to track. And he uses the example of a restaurant for a business example, where the owner was just simply tracking the amount of sales coming through the register each night, when that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, especially if you're in a restaurant in a good location or new and have some buzz. What really tells a story about how successful you're being in that particular case is actually what people are saying about your food and how they feel about your food. So when you actually measure that particular metric for a restaurant success, sales isn't everything because those will go away just as quickly if quality is poor. So that's kind of the concept there. It talks to us about Goodhart law, which is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So again, we start to, just because you can measure something, it doesn't mean that it's an important thing, kind of like the restaurant example. But the main thing is when you're talking something personally, it's something that could consume you doesn't become a good measure anymore. So a lot of times we get in this habit with weight loss, in all honesty. And I keep coming back to it, but it's a very simple, I think most people, if they haven't experienced needing to lose weight, know someone that has. So I feel like it's pretty relatable. But I'm going to take it from a perspective of the positive side. If you're looking at it and saying weight loss and part of your plan is to do some cardio and you've tied a caloric burn to that cardio, and let's say you have a goal to burn 350 calories in cardio day and you only burn 200, you come back and you say, I only burned 200 calories today. That is a negative thing, the way you're connotating on that. Connotating, is that a word even? I think it is. I just made it one if it's not. It's got to be. I know somebody's gonna comment on that. Please comment on connotating. But you still did something. You still compounded. You burned 200 calories. So what? You didn't burn 350. This again is where you put yourself up against an impossible standard sometimes, because maybe the circumstances said you couldn't. You know, you only had 20 minutes to do cardio. You're not going to burn 350 calories, or it'd be very hard to. He says instead, what we need to focus on are things like non-scale victories. So a lot of time, non-scale victories are tied to things like weight loss, but it's a general term, really. And what it means is, let's continue on with the weight loss theme because it's apropos here. It makes sense. So your pants that you couldn't fit into anymore, you can wear now. That's a non-scale victory. That's something that it shows progress, but doesn't necessarily reflect in a number. That's a non-scale victory. And there's any number of ways to look at non-scale victories, but it's anything that doesn't have to be measured that is progress, that you can say, wow, this is good. This is showing my progress without a measurement necessarily. Now, sometimes there are non-scale victories that are number-based, but that not always. So talks about the idea in the last chapter review today about an accountability partner. And of course, he gets in his classic inversion. So a lot of times before he gets into the actual accountability partner itself, he talks a little bit about some other concepts. And so we have to remember the idea of immediacy in this particular section. And so this time, if the law is make it satisfying, then make it immediately unsatisfying if there's something that you need to stop doing or need to have reinforcement from someone else. But again, immediate is the key. And then he stresses that if this gets to be something that's harmful, don't do something harmful just to make it unsatisfying. You know, don't, in that example, to continue that example of someone that's trying to reach a caloric goal, if you didn't work out, don't not eat. You have to eat. That's harmful to yourself if you don't. So, you know, make it smart here. If it's something that's really harmful to yourself, it's probably not a good way to go about it. And so that was really an interesting concept to me to continue to extend. And the last real thing he gets into is the idea of having an accountability partner. And he suggests that you actually write up a formal contract and actually have what the criteria for success, the habits you're going to do for success, and that unsatisfying thing you're going to do if you don't succeed or if you break a number of habits for a certain number of days. And in the one example he gave, there was actually some monetary things. He gave a couple examples. The one that sticks out in my mind was he said there was a gentleman that wanted to wake up at 5:55 a.m. every day, and he set his Twitter account to auto post to say something to the effect of, if you haven't seen me post that I've woken up for the morning at this time, then the first 5 people will receive $5 PayPal. And I thought that was pretty cool. Obviously, he has to get up and at least open his phone and at least turn off that auto notification and at least post that he's awake, which if you're going through that much mental capacity, you're probably just going to get up and be awake, and it probably serves its purpose. So he found a really neat way to do that. I'm not suggesting we always tie money into it because certainly everyone's in a different position. But if you certainly feel like that's something that's going to motivate you, maybe you do. I don't know. The one thing that I found the most interesting that I hadn't thought the most about in this whole thing was he said he would absolutely encourage everyone to sign it that's involved. So your accountability partner, and if there's any other parties that are going to aid you and assist you in this, or if they gave an example where I think he paid out a family member if he didn't do something who wasn't the accountability partner, you make sure they sign it as well. You know, it sounds pretty formal, but it sounds like it makes it very serious. And I know some people that will drive. So that's going to be up to you whether that makes sense for you to do or not. I couldn't tell you that. The main thing, you know, if you're not going to get to that level of doing a formal contract, the last thing you got into was share the habit with a partner and keep each other honest in each doing that habit. So if you're not going to go through the formal process of writing up a contract that's more focused on you, then find someone that has a similar goal to you and tell each other you're going to be accountable and find a way to call that out so that it's very obvious for each of you. You know, I think he tiptoed around this really well. The key for me on that is it's not truly a shaming thing. And we talk about shaming in our society right now. And it's a really, really hot topic because I think people say, oh, they're fat shaming or they're whatever shaming. I mean, it gets very ugly with the terms people say are shaming. And some of it is very true. A lot of it's probably very true, unfortunately. But in this case, I really think if you're doing this seriously with someone, it's not going to be shaming because you're going to be very clear about, so-and-so, I'm going out to do this. Where's your, run? In fact, what I see a lot of recently, to be very honest with you, is a group of friends that I have on Instagram. They're using social media to do this. They're doing a hashtag sweat check. Whenever they do their workout, their run, their jog, whatever, they sweat check, they tag a bunch of people just for their accountability. And, it's certainly voluntary, but yet what I've really yet to see is anyone call anyone out on it. I'm sure they do in private, which I think is probably the best way to go about this. So we've covered the 4 laws now. We covered the introduction. All we have left to do next week is go over the advanced concepts. I'm not sure I'll cover the entire section, but for your enjoyment, please feel free to go ahead and read and peruse that. I know I'm going to cover the first 2 portions of that last section. Beyond that, it starts to get out into some of the, I think he talks about some of his tools and things like that. I took a quick peek ahead. And I'm not sure I'm going to go there particularly, but we'll definitely wrap up strong, and I'll go through the entire book and pull my few concepts I feel that I think were the biggest ahas and quotes out. And then we'll see about potentially anything from there that you guys might want to extend. I know there's also some tools. There's a habit tracker he talked about in this section that I kind of left out because I brought it up earlier on one of the segments. But we'll certainly come back around and see where this leads us. At least one more section to go. If we can get more comments or more engagement or whatever, maybe we'll do another one. I mentioned it live. I'm not sure that's going to happen. But I've certainly worn this out and babbled enough, and I appreciate you guys for following along. So everybody have a great one. Take care.